Hey there, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for this special talk here at Blue Spiral. My name is Michael Maines, and I'm the director of the gallery. And we are here at Blue Spiral in our showcase gallery, where currently we have a solo show with Reuben, Negrón, who we'll be speaking with this evening. I also like to mention that along in his show entitled Echoes, we're featuring the sculptural works of ceramicist Eric Saratella. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank our team as well for staying after hours and working with us, and Blair for working behind the camera here. And if you have any questions during the talk, please type them into the comment section, and my colleague Casey will note which ones we haven't answered throughout the talk, and we'll get to them at the end of the discussion. Without further ado, I'd like to take it over to Reuben, and we'll get this conversation started. Thank you.
Hey everyone! Thanks for joining us.
So Reuben, the show is titled Echoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit more about the title and the inspiration behind this particular show?
Yeah, absolutely. So the show evolved out of a couple different places. First off and foremost, it's a visual response to my time living here in the mountains. We relocated here from up north, from the tri-state area, about 6 years ago. And for those who don't know, Southern Appalachia is very different from Connecticut, New York, and Jersey. And so, yeah, when I got here, I was inspired. I was inspired by the scenery. I was inspired by the people, the textures, the culture, the atmosphere, the mood, and I really wanted to explore all of those elements in one way or another. And at the same time, in my own personal work, I was thinking a lot about memory. I was thinking about specifically the memory of place and how memory is malleable. Every time we recall a memory, it isn't exactly the same, and how our memories are shaped by our feelings about the events that go on. So I was toying with this idea of the memory of place, and then also inspired by this new place that I was living in. So I just dove into it. I started collecting imagery from the area and collecting stories from people that I met, and started combining them all together to really try and connect and understand what I was feeling, why I was feeling it, and to really get to know the mountains a little bit better. As far as the title goes, that's kind of twofold. So my idea about memory being malleable and changing and fading over time, and being attached to place. It fell in line with the concept of an echo, something that's reverberating back to you, but forever fading and changing as it goes and as the sound travels. But I was also reading the poetry of Louise Gluck, and in specific, I found a poem entitled Fables. And in it, there's a line that says, "So the echo lingered," and that just fit perfectly with my idea of how memory attaches to a specific place, and it just kind of like went hand in hand. Also, I will say that the tone of that particular poem, which deals with wishes and dreams that and hopes that may or may not be fulfilled, really kind of like struck a chord with me, and I felt that it really married well with what I was feeling about the work I wanted to make about this place. So with that line, "So the echo lingered," I decided, I was going to use that as kind of like a visual call to the concept that I was exploring in the work.
Wow, I didn't know that. Aside from this show and Echoes and the poem that you just referred to, are you often inspired by poetry or literature and history in your work? It seems like you would be, but
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off as an illustrator. I from day one, all of my work has always been attached to storytelling in one way or another. And the work that I'm making now is no different. I've always been inspired by storytelling, whether it be in literature or poetry. I've always leaned a little bit more towards poetry in my work, simply because poetry is much more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's interpretive, and it allows for itself to be many things for many people, depending on what you need from it or what you want from it. So, my work, as long as I can remember, has been tied to storytelling and therefore influenced by poetry and literature, for sure.
with your work is very narrative, and you previously explored other narratives in your work. With your background in illustration, as I look through the gallery space, and this is something that after you just said that is really coming to me, is it's almost like a graphic novel as you look through the space, and each framed piece is telling a part of that story with the perspective, whether it's the perspective of you seeing the character in the imagery, or you yourself are becoming that character in the space. Whereas I'm looking at this one over here, and you're in the house. Maybe you were the one that just was sweeping and put the dustpan down, or you're looking out the front porch waiting to see who just left something at the front porch or something like that. How do these narratives inform your work, or does it go one way, or does it go both ways, where you have a narrative in mind and then the work is informed by that, or do you start with one piece and then it kind of builds the rest of the story?
That's a good question. I start with an idea. I start with this little inkling that I have that it might go somewhere or it might be something. But over the years, I've learned that I can't really force it. So I have as I've grown as an artist and as a person, I've become more open to receiving whatever it is that is presented to me along the way of me pursuing an idea. So, for instance, when I was younger, I had this. When I was first starting out, when I was younger, and I wanted to, when I was working on my paintings and drawings, I had a specific concept in mind that I was trying to pursue, and I would work with people or work in spaces that kind of like fit that idea. But the more I became receptive to just receiving whatever was going to happen and kind of open to happenstance, the more that I kind of just collected information and collected imagery and then kind of sorted through it in the process or afterwards, the more I became in tune with what it was that I was actually looking for and what it was that the artwork would actually become. When I'm going to start a new series, I basically have a little spark, a little idea, and then I kind of just like pursue it and see where it takes me. And sometimes it takes me a completely different place than I had intended, but I enjoy that ride. I like that. That's why I'm constantly inspired to make new work and to kind of like see where things go.
So with that in mind, what are some previous narratives that you've explored, and then how have those developed over time to become what we're looking at right now when we're standing in the show Echoes?
Yeah, sure. So my work has, I've always been interested in storytelling. I've always had like some kind of narrative attached to it, and my previous work, some of it has dealt. They all tend to. center around human nature in a way. I'm always motivated by the physical and psychological responses that we have that make us who we are as people. And to that end, you know, some of the previous work that I've done, I've dealt with narratives that deal with sexual identity. I've dealt with personal psychology. I've dealt with concepts of grief, of loneliness, yeah, just being sometimes, something as simple as that. And I think that as far as this series, this latest work I see is like kind of like a culmination of all of those things. I don't really look at my work as like individual chapters that kind of are disparate from each other. Every previous work builds on it until, you know, the next thing comes around. Does that answer your question?
It sure does. Yeah, absolutely. I have this question here, and I'm gonna read it verbatim because it's such a good question, and
Sure.
The gallery's assistant director Candace Riley really says it best here. So, if you look at a survey of your work, one of the predominant elements we see again and again is what I'd like to describe, or what she likes to describe, as performative isolation. Even in works where there are two or more figures interacting, the subjects seem to be lost in their own worlds. At the same time, they are the subjects of the viewer's gaze, often voyeuristic, and are depicted as if they are in performance for that gaze. So there is this introspective moment, but also an anticipation of a story. Could you explain to us more about that tension between the model and the anticipated conclusion or the performance?
Yeah, I love that. So, I can break that down into two things, into two aspects. The first is that I have always been drawn to and always been interested in the in-between moments. From the day-to-day, I've always wanted to capture a moment in time that was either directly before or directly after an action. I find more interest there. I find more beauty there in what some might say is the mundane or the quotidian. That's I find in those moments, those little moments that thread our lives together, you know, we have more of those moments than we do large events. So I feel there's a universality there that we can all relate to. There are quiet moments, there are introspective moments. Those are the things that in art that I personally am drawn to, whether it be in cinema or literature or poetry. I enjoy dealing with those really of finding the beauty in that, finding the beauty in the cracks, if you will. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the second part of that question, as far as the place of the viewer and the sometimes what can be called a voyeuristic or participatory nature of it, it is my goal, it is my intent that with every image that I make, the viewer can be placed in that scene with the subject. And the reason I do that is because I am a firm believer that my work isn't finished until someone sees it and finishes the narrative for me, or finishes it in their own head in whatever way that they feel that they need or want to. I want to create a setting for people to enter into it and interact with the work. So I actually very much in the composition of my work and the formulation of the work, I very much go into that with the intention of knowing that I'm going to be capturing something that is still, something that is going to be, hopefully introspective, definitely quiet, but that also the viewer will be able to enter into, that they are not just watching, but they are a part of that scene. And yeah, I do that. I do that as a way to bridge the gap between the art and the viewer. I want there to be dialogue. I want people to compare notes. I want two people looking at the same image to have completely different readings on it. It's one of the reasons why, while my work is narrative, it's purposefully ambiguous in its narrative. There is a message in my work, but I'm never going to overstate it, and I never want to knock someone over the head with what that message is. I want the viewer to be able to take that work to wherever they need to go.
So, I'll get back to one thing, but just with that comment,
Sure. Yeah.
is that one reason for this show in particular, the omission of titles?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent.
Yep.
So with what you just said, I mean, personally, I think you do a beautiful job of just what you just said, where you are depicting a narration, whether it has a figure in it or not. The viewer could certainly become the figure in the narration, or create the beginning or the end of said narration that they're looking at. I think the piece over far side of the gallery here of this scene of going down a sidewalk or a front stairway to somebody's house or a stairway to the park or whatever the scene is, the viewer is put into that sidewalk and they're either approaching or receding that gate. But at the same time, you wonder if somebody had just walked through the gate or if somebody was approaching you as the viewer. I think this is a prime example of exactly what you were just saying. At the same time, the woman on the shoreline over here, the timing of the image is how long until she has to get up and the tide is rising for her. And the vantage point is you looking down on her, so you are put into a situation where you know that figure, most likely. Otherwise, you're encroaching in her personal space. So when you work with a model when you put models in the image, like the one that we're looking at right now, for inspiration when you're building this narrative, how do you personally settle on the process of how the model is and what is your process when you have the model? Do you go into a photo shoot expecting a certain imagery, or do you just kind of go with it and see what comes from the scene?
I used to go into it wanting to guide the model towards, I used to go into it with an agenda, and I would guide the model towards whatever ends I needed to achieve that agenda. But as I was saying earlier, the more that I've grown as an artist, the more I see the people that I work with are, I don't even really like using the word models anymore. They're not models, they're collaborators. And every single piece that I do starts as a conversation with myself and the person I'm working with. And, as I said, when I am working on a new series, I have an idea, but I'm not really sure where that idea is going to take me. And for me, the artwork is following that journey of seeing where it's going to take me. And likewise, when I'm working with someone, we'll discuss what it is that my idea is, what their idea is. I always want to make sure that I'm depicting anyone that I'm working with how they want to be depicted, how they're comfortable, and what empowers them, what stories they want to tell, in addition to my ideas that I'm working with. So, also, to be frank, I want my work to feel and be natural. So I don't want there to be posing. I don't want there to be anything that's contrived. I want it to be natural body language. I want it to be a very easy, organic process. And so when I'm working with someone, we'll discuss what the overall concept is. And then when we feel comfortable with it or when the time is right, we'll work together. And my job at that point is just to capture information. I work with photography. That makes it a lot easier. So I am documenting the entire process, and however the person I'm working with feels the idea needs to be played out or interpreted, we run with it. And we adjust along the way, and my job is just to capture and collect all of that information and then process it on the back end. Yeah, it's a really organic, really kind of free-flowing process, and it's always full of surprises because I never really know where it's going to go.
I can't tell you how much I love that you call or the partnership between you and the figures that you're depicting as collaborators.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a really beautiful way of stating the relationship between you and the figures in your work. When you shoot the imagery or your collaborators in spaces or outdoors or whatever the subject matter may be, you must take a lot of images. And so how do you edit it down to find the right one? And then with that being said, do you ever revisit subject matter or scenes later on or change things around?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. So, I want to be respectful of people's time. So when I'm working with someone, we usually set aside a couple hours to work together. And like I said, I'm collecting images all in camera. And sometimes I don't even really, sometimes I'll see, a little scene and I'll know, okay, yeah, this is it. This is working. Let's work towards that. Sometimes I won't even really be able to tell until I get back home, throw my images onto the computer, and then sort through everything. And sometimes there's something in the images that is absolutely beautiful and I know that I want to use, but I'm not ready to just yet. So for instance, the imagery in this show, I've been collecting these images for the past 6 years. Some of these were taken from the first month of me living here, and some of them were taken very recently. And it's an editing process. It's me looking through the images, seeing what underlying threads are there, what I want to pursue, and then finding which combination of images work best to tell that story. Just the same way that you might edit a movie where you have, hours upon hours upon hours of footage and you gotta cram it down to 90 minutes. It's kind of the same process for me, where, there have been times, there have sometimes been gaps of years from me working with someone to me actually producing artwork with them in it. And it's all because of, one, my process is very methodical. Two, I want to make sure that when I do make that work of art, it's in the right place with the right purpose.
Well, one thing for us here at the gallery, just when you delivered the work and we were curating the space, we got to have some of that ownership of creating this story of ourselves in a way where you didn't give us parameters of this is the order I want the pieces. So we looked at the works individually and laid them out and figured out what kind of story we can tell within the space. So when the viewers come in, people coming in the gallery, they walk around and knowing which way most people tend to walk through the gallery space, played into it, and kind of creating this dialogue or this narrative ourselves. So that was a lot of fun for us. I think we did a pretty good job with.
I think you
with,
did too.
With,
I think it was
great.
No, I think you guys did a fantastic job. I love it.
So let's get down to some nitty gritty stuff here, because I'm pretty sure that there's probably some artists watching us right now, and they want to know, just a little bit about your background and understanding your artistic journey and the materials that you currently use and materials that you've used when you were starting out, because you started your career using oil, being an oil painter, if I'm correct. And so let's talk a little bit about the transition of material, the choice of using, these are all charcoal drawings, and the substrates that you're using for these and why you made those choices.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, I think like any artist, I've dabbled in a lot of different materials, and oils being one of them. I actually stopped using oils a long time ago because I was getting migraines from the fumes from the paints and the mediums. Sure. That's when I swapped oils for watercolors because of that. But I originally started out when I was really interested, like when I first went to college and I was making work, I was actually really interested in assemblage and mixed media work. And I did that for a really long time, but at the same time I was also painting with watercolor and I was using charcoal. Charcoal, actually, I was using charcoal long before I picked up watercolor. And oddly enough, as I became more interested in watercolor, which is what I'm sure most people know me for, I stopped working with charcoal, moved over into watercolor, and kind of like just focused on that for years. And it wasn't until 2017 that I picked up charcoal again, which I think at that point in 2017 it had been 15 plus years since I had used charcoal.
Wow.
But I specifically picked up charcoal again because, watercolor is very definite. Watercolor, I have to plan everything out. It's a very meticulous process, especially if you know my work. My watercolors are very detailed, and the thing about watercolor is that if you make a mistake in watercolor, you're screwed. Like, you might be able to cover it up, but you're definitely not going to be able to pick anything off. I mean, you can to an extent, but not that much. So it's a very time-consuming process, and I wanted to change a little bit. I wanted to move into something that was a little bit more malleable and something that made a more dramatic mark, and that's charcoal. It's the perfect marriage between both of those things, allowing me a full range of values from the super darks to the super lights, but also forever, almost to a fault, malleable, like the opposite of watercolor in that way, where, if I accidentally brush up against one of my drawings, it's gone. Right now using both mediums feels right. It feels like I'm hitting all the bases that my brain needs to hit at the moment.
To those watching, if you haven't been down to the gallery to visit the exhibition, there are a few pieces on the back side of the gallery, the showcase gallery, that are watercolor. And if you haven't seen Reuben's watercolors, they're pretty extraordinary. And seeing these charcoal drawings are equally as astonishing. especially with the scale that he is able to push with it. Tell us a little bit about, are you doing the charcoal on paper? Or what's the substrate that you're using here for this exhibition?
So all of the drawings in this exhibition are charcoal on paper. And the paper has been mounted onto aluminum panel. I work with a company called Artifacts Art. They're out of California, and they produce these beautiful, it's called ACM panels, aluminum composite material panels. And they have several advantages. One advantage being that they're archival. So it's my understanding that these are the same panels that are used in conservation efforts in order to preserve the life of works on canvas or works that are being restored. The paper is mounted onto the panel using an acid-free, pH-neutral, and also reversible adhesive. So if needs be, for conservation purposes, the paper can be pulled off of the aluminum panel. And the other benefit is no warping, no wrinkling. It's a flat surface, it's a rigid surface. It allows me to work on multiple pieces at once because I can pull them off the easel or put them on the easel as needed. And they're really strong. So when I frame them, I know that charcoal and pastels can sometimes have get a bad rap because they can shed or they, works on paper can be delicate. So attaching them to an aluminum panel just gives them that extra bit of strength that, now it's no different than working on an oil or an acrylic on panel.
So when you mount the paper onto the aluminum before you begin?
Yes. Yep. The paper is already mounted onto the aluminum, so it is a crisp, white, clean slate, rigid, ready to go.
And you mentioned the use of an easel. So do you work on these upright or flat? I would imagine, with charcoal you have a bit of a fight with gravity a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So is it a mixture of both?
No, I actually work on them vertically the entire time. Maybe that's not the smartest thing to do. But actually, funny story, there is a piece that you have around the corner here that I was working on, and I've always done all of my charcoal drawings vertically, specifically because I do want to make use of that gravity and have the charcoal powder fall, so that it doesn't just pool, because then eventually when you pick it up, it shifts. So I want it to shed a little bit while I'm working. But the piece right around the corner, I was almost done with it, and I had a microfiber cloth that I was using to clean the screen of my iPad, which I use to have my reference on it while I'm working. And the microfiber cloth fell on the drawing and completely wiped away the center of the drawing. Just a strip down the middle, completely gone.
Oh, that drawing.
That one right there, yeah.
Oh, wow.
That one right there. If we want to show it here, let's come right over here. So this drawing was about I would say 90% done, and it just fell right here and wiped away all of this detail, gone. And so I had to recreate that. But luckily charcoal I can, so it wasn't too bad.
So that's a really good segue into my next question, which will actually be one of our last until we open it up to our viewers. That was obviously a challenging moment for you. So what do you find to be the greatest challenge as an artist, be it starting, finishing, or finding the right image, inspiration from your work or your audience, the dreaded mistake, especially with watercolor, as you've mentioned, or with the microfiber cloth falling in the center of your piece. What are some challenges that you find, and how do you overcome them as an artist?
That's a good question. For me, coming up with ideas, accidentally wiping away half your drawing, the physical constraints of the images that you're making, all of that. That's the fun part of art for me. Artists are inherently problem solvers, and we love challenging ourselves to outdo ourselves. We're constantly placing new parameters and finding ways to overcome those hurdles, and that's what makes art fun. So I don't see those things as challenges. To answer your question, I really think that the biggest challenge, or the biggest challenge for artists today, at least in my view, is it's actually people undervaluing what we do. I think that there's a certain idea in society that if we choose to go into the arts, if we choose to become creative in whatever way, that we are making the choice to have a life of hardship, that we are making a choice to not be taken seriously. And quite frankly, I think that's bullshit. Artists and creatives in general, we write books, we write poetry, we make music, we make movies, television, all of these things that enhance and enrich everyone's life. And time again, there's this narrative that artists aren't supposed to be successful, that artists aren't supposed to make money, that artists aren't supposed to have access to the same things that everyone else wants. Art is work. Art is work, plain and simple. Art is work, and we want to pay our bills, feed our families, maybe go on vacation, all the things that everyone else has a desire to do, but we are undercut financially. People want to exploit us. They don't want to pay what our work is worth. Art programs are constantly underfunded or cut out completely. And that's problematic for me, and that's problematic for anyone that's in a creative field. I think that if we could all just understand the value that creatives of all types bring to the world, bring to society, and how we are the ones that make it possible to give life to someone else's ideas or visions or hopes and dreams. I think that if we can just understand that and appreciate it, it would be better for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. It's beautifully said. We have a question here from one of our listeners.
Sure. I'm gonna run and grab some water.
When we're looking at these pieces, and not necessarily maybe even the ones in this series, but just looking at your entire breadth of work, the gaze of your collaborator, the figures that you're depicting. Can you talk a little about eye contact versus a passive gaze, and how that kind of plays into your editing process?
Sure, absolutely.
And we'll get back to what we were just talking about too. I just want to answer some of these questions.
I have made, it depends. So the easiest way to explain that is that when someone is looking at you directly in the eye, there's a confrontational aspect to it. Not necessarily in a negative way, but you are directly addressing. There's a connection between the two people involved, or the multiple people involved. So looking directly in the eye says something. It makes an impact. It has an emotional response immediately. Whereas when the gaze is averted, or someone is lost in thought and they're off looking somewhere else, that has a completely different emotional response, psychological response, and I use that as a way to either elicit confrontation or to elicit a completely different response. And depending on what I'm working on, whatever the concept is for that particular painting, I'll make that choice about whether or not it makes sense to have eye contact or to not. In my series, This House of Glass, for instance, many of the people that I painted are looking at the viewer. And that was on purpose. That was because those were people that I was depicting with a very specific narrative, and I wanted them to confront the viewer. Whereas in these pieces, there's no need for confrontation because the end goal is different. The end goal of these pieces is to create or to evoke a feeling of space, of place, of time, and I want the viewer to walk into the space, and I don't want anything to stop them in their tracks. So there's no need for eye contact here. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Cool.
We have a question here from Lucy. She says, I love color and can't quite figure out why I'm so drawn to your charcoal drawings. It's something about your light and the drawings and the direct emotional response. Why? Why is she so, when you omit, I mean, I can't answer that, but I guess when I see that question, I feel that too, where when I come into this room or this gallery space, my first thought process isn't that these are black and white drawings. It's more about the imagery itself. And I see color in here for some reason. I can visualize what that house looks like. And I think that there's something for me, when you remove that specific color to a what could be seen as a specific narrative, there's a relatable aspect to it where I've lived in a house like that. But because the walls aren't green, I can really feel like I have lived there, where there's almost this capturing of a memory or something. And maybe that's not your intent at all, but that's how I feel when I view the works, and certainly when I talk to clients when they come into the gallery and hear what they're saying, where they can really relate to the imagery. And I would imagine for you it's similar maybe. So can you explain kind of the omission of color in this particular body of work, and when you do work with watercolors, how you treat color within your work?
I mean, I'm happy to hear you say that it's evocative of memory, because going back to what I was saying in the beginning, that was one of the concepts that I was dealing with and exploring when I decided to start this series. And I very specifically, I made the choice to use charcoal for this series because I wanted it to be black and white. And by being black and white, I wanted it to be, I wanted everyone to have the possibility of connecting with it, because I wasn't using anything, specific colors or whatnot that made it too definite of a particular place. It's more of a universal place. So yeah, I'm happy to hear you say that, because that was definitely my intention. As far as why some people may see color, I don't know. It probably goes back to that idea that it is drawing on or making use of people's finishing the narrative, of tying into memory, of evoking a certain feeling of a place or time, and how we relate to that psychological response. So it can be many things to many people.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps that's it.
Interesting. Well, this is super cool. We have another one of the gallery's artists watching us right now, and
Nice.
Alberto Ortega,
awesome! I love
who's
this
a
work. Yeah.
phenomenal painter with our gallery, asks, how do you negotiate with the reference image, or how faithful are you to it? Do you try to get the perfect reference, or do you know that there will be some deviation?
Oh, there's always deviation. There's no such, for me personally, oddly enough, I think I'm a pretty mediocre photographer. When I'm photographing by reference, my goal is to capture as much information as possible, which doesn't necessarily make for the most compelling photographic images. But in capturing all of the information, I'm able to pick and choose and edit out, or just improvise as needed. I don't know. I think my work walks a really fine line. I definitely am not a slave to the reference at all. The reference is a roadmap for me. And if I follow that roadmap, cool. If I don't, also cool. And I find myself all the time changing things as needed to fit the image. We'll take this one for example. She was standing on rocks and there were rhododendron around her, but I didn't paint or render every single rhododendron leaf. I didn't include every single fallen tree or vine that was in the background, because if I did, it would have been too distracting. It was too much. Likewise, with working on the rocks, there comes a certain rhythm and a movement that you get when you're working on a piece, and you just go. And if the landscape changes, so be it. I feel the same way when I'm working with figures. The reference is a roadmap. So it's there if I need it, but I'm also confident in my process that if something goes off the rails or deviates from the plan, I can go ahead and pick up where that leads me and keep going.
Well, we're getting to the end of our discussion here. To make sure that I want to ask one question. You can answer. You don't have to.
Sure. Yeah.
But this is a lot of work. Phenomenal work.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that you're enjoying the break right now from finishing this impressive show. But myself, my colleagues, people out there watching, what's next? What are you working on? What's next?
Well, my break is already over. I've already started working again. Figured. I'm not yet ready to share what that is just yet, but it'll, anyone that follows me online will see that come to life over the next couple months. But short answer, I don't really know. I can't predict what comes next, But I will say that I'm really excited about how this body of work allowed me for the first time to explore environments independent of the figure. And that's absolutely something that I want to pursue moving forward.
Awesome.
So I don't know exactly how that's going to manifest, but that is content that I will be carrying with me forward.
Awesome. Well, if you don't already follow Reuben online, his Instagram handle is at Reuben Negrón, and he is quite popular on Instagram, and so you'll see a lot of these teasers coming in the future, I'm sure. I want to go ahead and thank Reuben for being with us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
And if you are in the area, please come visit the gallery to see Echoes and the other exhibitions we have on view right now, which will be up until the end of April. And then we'll be switching over the entire gallery for 4 new exhibitions opening in the beginning of May. So please follow us for some updates on those new exhibitions. And come on down and see Reuben's show Echoes here at the gallery, or view it online at www.bluespiral1.com. Again, thank you, Reuben, for being with us tonight, and thank you all out there for being with us as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone that tuned in.
You'll have a good night.